conference call. It is hosted by Portfolio Management Services of Prabhudas Lilladher. Today's webinar is all about discussion on very important topic which most of us have, and we would like to understand that what one should do in the current market scenario. That is, everyone has a very valid question that should we invest now or should we wait? So for the same reason, today we have with us my colleague Ajay, who will be discussing with every one of you about the opportunities in the current market. At the same time, how one should look at constructing the individual portfolios, because we have seen a lot of volatility when market has come up from all-time high. Then we saw that again there was a sharp pullback rally. So without taking a further time, I will just request Ajay to start with today's discussion on Indian equities, whether to invest now or wait. Ajay, please, and post Ajay's discussion, we would definitely take few questions. Thank you, everyone. All participants' line will be in the mute mode only. In case if you have any queries or the questions, you can please type us and we will definitely take post the call is done. Ajay, please start with the today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Nupur, and a warm welcome to all the participants who are there for this webinar. I think, as Nupur said, we are witnessing an unprecedented health crisis, a once in a century pandemic, and we have sort of seen the markets correcting sort of every 5 to 7 years. But the underlying cause for those corrections always has been the financial excesses, whether it is build-up of high leverage to support the mortgage industry, as one saw in the great financial crisis of 2008, or the excesses in the dot-com bubble that led to an unprecedented rout in the technology, media, and telecom sector stocks, in particular in the year 2000, after the Nasdaq sort of peaked and the Indian market sort of followed suit. We also saw sort of certain mini bouts of turbulence in the year 2003. If you recollect the taper tantrum that started in May 2013, when the then Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke felt that the quantitative easing that they had done in the wake of the Lehman crisis post 2009, I think he felt at that point in time it had run its course, and hence he hinted that they would like to sort of pedal back on the QE, and that led to sort of a tumbling in the emerging market currencies, and India was also impacted. This was in May to August 2013. But what is different this time round is that the genesis of the current turbulence does not lie as much in the financial excesses, although they do form a part, and I'll come to that. But it is essentially the health crisis, and hence the panic that one saw in the market in the initial days was regarding the uncertainty, I think, engendered by this health crisis. And what is the end game? How long would the economies continue to remain shut? And as someone put it, this is the recession that is expected to follow the global recession is not as much a recession, but a cessation, because it is a cessation of activities as mandated by the various health experts and policymakers that has led to the shuttering down of large parts of the world, leading to loss of economic output, massive increase in unemployment, possible rise in inequality between the haves and the have-nots, and the social discord that it could entail going forward. So I think these are the issues that sort of were at the core of the turbulence that one saw in the markets for the last couple of months. I think in the Indian context, I think all of us know that the Indian markets are heavily intertwined with the global markets, and in particular, if I could use the mother market of all the equity markets, which is primarily the American market. We are the recipient of large amounts of foreign investments in the form of FPIs as well as FDI. Any developing country that has a current account deficit, essentially it implies that the gap between domestic savings and domestic investments is bridged by foreign savings, and that's what current account deficit is. And hence, I think when one saw risk aversion heightening in the global markets, money moving out of risk assets like equities, both in developed equities and also emerging market equities, I think one saw a disproportionate kind of impact on the equities of emerging markets. In Indian context, in particular, I think one had seen roughly 65 to 70,000 crores of FI outflows in a span of just a month or so, and that was accompanied by an equally ferocious outflow of fixed income securities being sold by FIs, and debt outflows of around 55 to 6,000 crores accompanied the large torrent of liquidity flowing out of the equity markets. Uh, so that essentially sort of fueled the panic in the Indian equity markets. But post demonetization, one encouraging trend that we saw is an confidence and increased participation by the Indian retail investors through domestic financial institutions like insurance companies and mutual funds. And the figures for the last month clearly indicate that the Indian investors have matured, and despite the depths of darkness, I think in the equity scenario last month, the SIP flows continued to remain robust at roughly around 8,000 crores, and the overall flows of around 11,000 crores continued to pour into Indian equities. I think it's to be first looked at from the global perspective. And a couple of points I'd like to make on the global perspective. The first part is that after the initial sort of pandemonium that essentially struck the equity markets, leading to massive erosion in the global markets, I think we saw swift and unprecedented kind of intervention from the policymakers, in particular the US Federal Reserve as well as the US government. I think what distinguishes the response of the policymakers this time around vis-a-vis the previous crisis is that previously, I think they used to think long and hard, and it was a very ponderous kind of response spread out over many weeks, if not months. And even that response was, if I could, half-hearted. It was not a sort of a kind of a war cry or a battle cry that used to come from the policymakers that we are going to ensure that whatever we can do to stem the panic, we need to do that. So this is what distinguishes, I think, the current response, and that's why one saw that although in 3 weeks the plunge was unprecedented, but the rapid rise subsequent to that can also be attributed to this swiftness and the quantum of response that the policymakers delivered. So to put it simply, roughly 11% of the American GDP of 20 trillion dollars, to the extent of 2.2 trillion dollars over a matter of a few weeks. I think the rancorous Democrats and Republicans kind of shed aside their differences in the Congress, came together, and along with the US administration, passed nearly 3 bills in both the houses to get a cumulative amount of $2.2 trillion of fiscal stimulus to help small businesses to the extent of $350 billion, various industries like airlines, hospitality, restaurants, some sort of fiscal support, plus individuals, unemployment insurance at a rapid clip, was extended to even professionals. So I think these measures, I think, are quite unprecedented, and they essentially provide a bridge between the situation today, when the policymakers want the economy to be shuttered and hence people to stay at home, and a reasonable time, possibly a few weeks, if not a month, month and a half, in which the economy can be opened in a staggered manner. So income support in the interim is the whole idea, and alleviating the economic pain and misery brought about by the pandemic and the loss of employment opportunity and income is what was behind this rapid response from the US administration. But even before the US administration's response, what was important was the Fed's response. I think unlike last time around when they took months on end to announce QE1, QE2, Operation Twist, and QE4, this time around they tried initially uh, by saying that they will be supporting various government securities markets and MBS, mortgage-backed securities markets, and they announced a few $100 billion of support. But when they saw that this is not stemming the panic, they essentially said that it will be an open-ended support. There is no limit. We will take whatever it takes to support and to stabilize the yields in various parts of the US fixed income markets, be it government securities market, be it the MBS, mortgage-backed securities market. And for the first time, they ventured to buy investment-grade corporate debt, sort of, because they thought that if the yields go up uh, rapidly for corporates in America, that could lead to rising tide of bankruptcies. And these insolvencies, in turn, could feed into further panic in the equity markets and other asset classes. And hence, they wanted sort of, to put a lid to that panic. And unprecedented as the times are, just a few days back, they announced that even non-investment grade debt of corporates, which is what is called junk bonds, will also be bought along with the ETFs of junk bonds. So I think now the only asset class where the Fed has shied away from now is essentially the equities market. Other than that, I think all parts of fixed income markets, I think they have covered, and the response is open-ended. Uh, so this essentially was the reason why one saw, along with the flattening of the curve, sort of, so this accompanied by, I think, reports from various Western European countries, as well as the epicenter of the pandemic in America, which is New York State and New York City in particular, that the incremental cases are now decelerating, as also the incremental deaths on a daily basis are slowing down. Is what sort of has has led to the rally. And the third part obviously is a strong belief that some curative line of treatment, and I'm using the words very carefully, not a preventive line of treatment, which essentially is a vaccine, which is a good 12 to 18 months away, sort of roughly. If it happens earlier, the better. But a curative line of treatment, some sort of an antiviral or some sort of other treatment which can reduce the rate of fatality, as well as which can essentially reduce the in case one is afflicted with with the disease, one can at least sort of have a line of treatment that will ensure that one gets fully recovered. So that, I think, a combination of these three factors, I think, has led to the rally in the global markets. And as the global markets, and in particular America, has steadied, as the VIX or the fear gauge there has come down from the highs of 80s to around, say, 40s and 50s, I think one clearly is seeing a similar trend playing out in the other markets. Uh, just before we come to India, and the last point I want to touch is essentially what's happening in the global commodity markets. And in particular, I think the crude oil market. I think with the falling out between Russia and Saudi Arabia, I think tremors sort of were felt all across the global economies, with Saudis throwing the gauntlet at the Russians and reducing the oil prices significantly. Uh, Now, obviously, that created problems for many economies, including America, because the shale oil complex in America, especially the Permian Basin and in Texas, I think the marginal cost of extraction of oil is among the is extremely high as compared to the traditional companies in America, as well as sort of countries like Saudi Arabia, other Gulf countries, and Russia. And hence, I think the intervention by the U.S. government to bring about a rapprochement, some sort of a peace between Russia and OPEC, and forcing them sort of in a way to cut the output by 9.7 million barrels a day. However, the demand destruction has been multiple times of that. As per certain global sort of commodity researchers, the loss in output is two or at least three times of the total production cuts that were announced by OPEC Plus. And hence, after a semblance of calm that lasted only for a day or that only lasted for a few days, I think one again saw a sharp plunge in crude oil prices because of lack of storage facilities, and hence I think we saw the unprecedented negative rates for the near-term futures for crude oil prices, and a sharp plunge in the June and July sort of the near month crude oil prices. Uh, so now coming to the Indian context. Now, as I said, sort of we need to always keep one eye on how the global markets are faring because of the capital linkages, the deep sort of FPI linkages that our markets have with the global markets and the impact that has on the flows in India. Now the current account, because you have a capital account in your current account. In the current account, if you look, I think the sharp sort of precipitous fall in the crude oil prices, I think spells uh, good news for India because 85% of our total crude requirements are imported, and roughly $1 drop in global crude prices roughly corresponds to $1 billion of savings that India has annually on its import bill. So if we take 60 as the price on an average, say last year, and if the oil prices were to remain between say $30-$35, you're clearly looking at $30 to $25 billion of savings that will accrue to India. Now, for an economy roughly whose GDP is around say $2.5 trillion, I think that represents a good 1 to 1.5% percent of savings on our trade deficit and our current account deficit. That is good because it also helps. It also leads to easing of imported inflation, and an RBI can breathe easy in its interest rate management. And sort of because what happens is that if oil prices start moving up sharply, then it has impact on imported inflation. It also sort of then starts putting pressure on a massive pressure on rupee, and then RBI becomes worried in terms of its interest rate management and lowering interest rates. So when the reverse happens, when interest rates, when oil prices plunge, I think a virtuous circle start, and that can help the monetary authorities in terms of conducting their monetary policy without being concerned about unnecessary impact on outflows and on the currency, local currency. So I think so we have a very positive tailwind, and it does look like in the medium term. I think even if as the economies open up, it will be a staggered opening of all the economy, and hence the increase in demand for oil, I think, will move up, but will move up in a phased manner. Also, I think global oversupply is a reality you cannot uh, deny, and hence I think both from demand perspective and from supply perspective, oil prices should continue to remain benign, uh, and hence the terms of trade for a large oil importer like India are very positive. So I think this is unalloyed positive news for India. Secondly, if you look at the interest rates, I think you've seen the monetary stimulus being given by the RBI by cutting rates, by lowering CRR, and by unveiling measures to ease the liquidity pain that corporate sector is facing, as well as the financial sector is facing. So I think RBI has gone out of its way in terms of sort of ensuring that the liquidity needs the liquidity concerns do not morph into solvency concerns for India Inc. And that's why we saw sort of aggressive interventions by RBI a couple of times since the COVID crisis and the lockdown began. On the fiscal side, one could argue that the Indian government has been a bit miserly and only given a fiscal stimulus of between 1.5 to 1.7% of GDP. But then let's not forget that we are not a developed country like America that has the extraordinary privilege of having its currency as the reserve currency. And hence, even if America were to stimulate its economy by giving large fiscal stimulus, I think the rating agencies are far more benign towards a developed country. Whereas in case of a developing country like India, they are far more stringent and, dare I say, a bit biased. And hence, I think we need to watch sort of our fiscal position, because let's not kid ourselves. Although on paper our fiscal deficit is say 3.3% or 3.5% of GDP, if you look at the off-balance sheet borrowings that the government has done, through companies like NHAI, through companies like Food Corporation of India, PFC, REC, then I think the fiscal deficit, if you add these off-balance sheet liabilities, clearly goes to increases by 1% more to around say 4.5%. And then if you add the state government deficits of between 2.5 3%, we already are at around say 7.5%. Plus this 1.7% of additional burden the government has. Also, the fiscal position looks quite grim because I think there has been massive shortfalls both in direct taxes and indirect taxes over the last 12 months. The divestment proceeds have fallen short. Telecom receipts have been lower than what was budgeted. So almost all the revenue items for Government of India have been far lower than what was budgeted. And if you just look forward for next 12 months, I think a very stiff divestment target has been set, and that clearly looks like if the markets remain lackluster, I think a massive shortfall could be seen on the divestment target. Also, the revenue targets, I think, do look quite ambitious in the current context. So I think, in my opinion, the government will go ahead and announce one more stimulus, but it will be reasonable to assume that the stimulus will be moderate in nature and will again be targeted towards those industries and sections of the economy, I think, which the government perceives as most vulnerable. So I think that's the response that the government sort of would have. Now, insofar as the lockdown is concerned, I think it is anyone's guess. I think how soon sort of one can get back to normalcy. My guess basically is that on the 3rd of May, I think with the exception of say hotspots like Mumbai and Delhi and some other places, I think the economic activity would be allowed to resume sort of in a staggered manner. But whether the interstate sort of travel through railways or airlines or other means is started, I think it's still up in the air. Uh, I think if you look at now the markets and the impact of all these sort of on the on the economy, I think one clearly must remember that 55 to 60% of the Indian sort of population still lives in the rural areas. And although agriculture and allied activities contribute around 19 to 20%, 18 to 20% of our GDP, but such a large chunk of the population's livelihood is dependent basically on agri and allied activities. Now we've had the best monsoons, on the best in last 25 years. Last year, the Rabi harvest has been bumper. In fact, just today I was reading that the harvest of wheat will be exceeding the harvest of rice, which was the last Kharif harvest, which rarely happens. So I think we are that are in consumer finance, that are manufactured tractors, that are in two-wheelers, passenger vehicles, agrochemicals, fertilizers. And the feedback that we are getting essentially, or even FMCG companies, is that the impact in the urban areas is more pronounced, and the rural areas, I think, as we sort of, as the lockdown is eased in a staggered manner, I think one can expect the aggregate demand in case of many discretionary items. Also, I think till such time that a curative line of treatment is found, I think everyone would keep health and safety as the first priority. And hence, I think the embrace of consumption insofar as moving out in many sectors like travel, hospitality, restaurants, multiplexes, clearly will be impacted to a large extent. And also large ticket purchases in case of say consumer discretionary items like automobiles, high value consumer durables, could also see jewelry, could also see sort of could also see an impact. Also in rural area, in the rural context, one must remember that the migrant labor that has basically now moved to rural areas, there has been a loss of jobs, and also those sort of who would have stayed back in cities. I think their remittances to their sort of families also could come under pressure, and hence I think that could act as a headwind for sort of when we talk to various banks and NBFCs. The other point that comes to light is sort of the moratorium anyway has been availed of many corporates and individuals. but whether a moral hazard will develop. Typically, what happens is if you continue to give sort of a moratorium for longer and longer periods, a certain section of the borrowers then become complacent in terms of paying back, even if they have the ability to pay back. That's called moral hazard, and that sort of is something that banks and NBFCs are worried of. What percentage of people sort of could fall in that kind of fall in that bucket. Also, I think MSME sector, which already was reeling due to after demonetization and the rollout of GST, and where sort of tax arbitrage was one of the advantages pre-GST and which they had lost, I think has been dealt a body blow due to this crisis, and many of them had borrowed sort of or were sort of had borrowed from various NBFCs and banks. So the trajectory of the spike in NPLs in the MSME sector, micro, small, and medium enterprises, is something that one need to keep a close watch on. Real estate sector is another sector that will get impacted savagely, because as it is pre-COVID, for a few years, one had seen the velocity of sales being extremely muted, and the leverage levels going up, and this is only added sort of a further heavy burden for the real estate sector. Sort of I think that's why the demand from a venerable personality like Mr. Deepak Parekh, that one-time restructuring ought to be considered by the regulator, sort of for real estate projects. I think this is something which the industry, I think needs to aggressively pursue with RBI to ensure that I think there is a one-time relief that the housing finance companies and banks do get insofar as their exposure to real estate sector is concerned. Uh, I think many analysts are betting on a V-shaped recovery. Now, a V-shaped recovery essentially means that you have a hiatus or a stoppage for say a month or two, and then suddenly, sort of one can start seeing the demand coming back roaringly after the lockdowns are lifted. But I think I would be in the camp that believes that the recovery will be a U-shaped recovery, because, as I mentioned in the previous comments, I think the caution, I think, and the scare sort of will have a, in my opinion, lasting imprint on many of the consumers, and they would sort of be tentative and worry in terms of going all out and embracing the consumption as was happening during the pre-COVID levels. Uh, now, in now, so how should sort of one look at the portfolio construct? So, in my opinion, I think this is the time to focus more on uh, balance sheet. Now, what happens is obviously in as an analyst, you look at both profit and loss in the balance sheet, both the statements and the cash flow statement, of course. But it is during these times, sort of of turbulence and sort of heightened risk aversion, that the emphasis on the cash flow statement and the balance sheet becomes all the more important. And it is only those franchises which have a strong sort of cash positions, which have businesses which generate good operating cash flows after working capital changes, uh, and which have a pole position in their industry, are the ones that one should be focusing on. I think this is not the time to be adventurous, and although many sectors, the stocks in many sectors would possibly have come off sort of by say 40, 50, 60%, but just because the stock has come off sharply does not in itself make the stock sort of make one look at that stock in a positive light. I think because clearly I think there has been a sea change in terms of the environment over the last couple of months, and hence the emphasis on a solid balance sheet is something that one must focus on. uh, Now, what are the sectors that sort of one should look at? But before that, I think we had done some our sort of broken colleagues had done some numbers, and if you look at the market consensus also, the now let me first put out a caveat. It is difficult because the situation is hazy uh, for uh, for uh, for uh, 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 for one to sort of take a long term call in terms of the earnings trajectory. But it would be reasonable to assume that FY20, I think the impact that one has seen over the last uh, few weeks and the commentary that's coming from the various managements, I think it will be reasonable to say that the Nifty EPS for FY 1920, that the year that just went by, I think uh, will fall by at least 8 to 10% versus FY 1819. Uh, but more importantly, now going forward in FY 2021, the current financial year, just 2 months, that is prior to COVID, all the analysts were gung ho that the earnings drought or the famine that one had seen over the last 4 to 5 years due to banks taking accelerated provisions, many auto companies also not faring well, and resulting in the impact on the Nifty earnings. They thought that, and plus, a lot of recoveries through the IBC mechanism in case of steel companies, cement companies, etc., and other companies that were in trouble, was making people believe that FY 2021 will be the first year after 5 or 6 years in which the Nifty earning EPS will grow in, say, in mid 20s. But I think, today, I think, as things stand, uh, in my opinion, although second half one can build in recovery, but on a cumulative basis for the full year, it would be reasonable to assume that the earnings will not grow at more than 8 to 10%. So I think, it would be reasonable to assume an 8% growth in earnings for FY 2021. Now 22, I think it's all the more difficult, but people are still baking in. The Bloomberg consensus still is as high as 30% growth over FY21, where the people have toned down the expectations, as I said, to 15%, between 12 and 15%. Although we believe that 8% is a reasonable growth in Nifty EPS for the current year, and going forward, I think, one will have to again tone down expectations, and say 20-25% growth is what current situation looks like on a small on a very low base. One can look at growing. Now at the current 9,300 levels, I think if one looks at 9,300 levels, very crucial level, because from a high of 12,500 to low of 7,500, this is a 38% kind of a retracement. And if it consolidates and decisively moves up, then one can expect a rally to around 10,000 levels, or else one can easily test it 8,500 levels, in case there is a inability to hold that level. On a fundamental basis, I think that's what I said on a technical basis. But on a fundamental basis, if I look at the earnings, I'm expecting Nifty EPS of between of 516 rupees for 12 months from now, which is April 2021. So and hence if I look at the P ratio, I think the last 10 years average of P ratio has been around 19.2 times. Uh, uh, but let's not forget that during 2008 crisis, it had gone to as low as 10.8 times 1 year forward earnings. So if you look at from that perspective, I think I would say that we are in a zone where, unless there is a strong comeback in the earnings trajectory in the second half of the current financial year, I think we could very well see the Nifty facing a cap at between 10,000 and 10,500 levels. However, if the earnings come back strongly and that 8% eventually we look at between 12 and 13%, and going forward in 22, I think the trajectory of 20 to 25% holds, then I think one can expect the markets to move up. Say in a bull case scenario, I think we are looking at between say 11,500 to 12,000 levels 12 months from now. Let's not forget that markets are the leading indicators, and economic data or economy or the GDP numbers are lagging indicators. Also, a lot of people ask me that what is the right time to plunge into the market, to buy into the market. Should we come back when the market has fallen to a particular level? And to them, my humble response always is that, other than the Almighty, no one knows the point of inflection, and hence it is always advisable to buy in a falling market, because the fallen market, we don't know at what point the market has fallen and will be turning around. Similarly, it's difficult to know what is the highest point of the market, and hence one needs to sell in a rising market. So using the same dictum, I feel that one, if one has to invest say 100 rupees, one can reasonably expect. Because my belief is that I think with so much of being with so much fiscal stimulus and monetary stimulus being thrown in, not only by America but by ECB, Japan, uh, and other developed countries, plus China, I think the liquidity itself will trump over the concerns on earnings to start with. And I think, as the economic activity picks up, say 3 months from now, I think that's when sort of the fundamental support could come for the market. So I think the previous lows look, in my opinion, difficult to be breached at the current juncture, and hence I think any sort of correction ought to be used to get into the market. So I would sort of start in a staggered manner, and at least 30% of total commitment that I need to make, I think I would start doing it now, and then sort of take it sort of as the result season progresses and one gets to hear the commentary both in the developed world as well as in India. I think one can start sort of looking at staggering one's commitments based on that. But certainly, I think as I told you, the tailwinds, be it in terms of the support for the macro fundamentals, in terms of the savings in the oil, the monetary policy being stimulative or accommodative, fiscal stimulus coming, sort of makes and the fact of the matter is that China and India are the only two countries as per IMF where sort of the growth will be in a positive territory, and capital gravitates towards those economies where there is growth. That's the basic axiom. So, and one saw yesterday, I think one of the largest FDI deals in technology sector. So that essentially is a testimony to the to the growth potential that the Indian economy holds, and how the global biggies look at the Indian context over the medium to long term. So I think sectorally, I think I'll just wrap it up and then we'll throw open the floor for questions. I think sectorally, if one looks at it, then I think the sector that has been the whipping boy in the last 1 month is banking and financial services, NBFCs. Now here again, as we discussed, there are concerns about spike in NPAs due to various vulnerable sectors like unsecured credit, be it credit cards, personal loans, or MSME sector, or loan against property, loan against shares. So these are the vulnerable pockets. But I think the Indian private sector banks, in my opinion, are very strongly capitalized. If you look at banks like HDFC Bank, Kotak Bank, ICICI Bank, they are extremely strongly capitalized, and hence I think they are in a position, and plus their risk management skills are among the best in the world, credit appraisal skills and risk management skills. So I think they will be able to weather the turbulence and I think emerge stronger. And for any economy to do well, I think the banking and financial services sector, which is the backbone of that economy, needs to be stable and needs to thrive. So I think the current savage underperformance for the sector, in my opinion, if you take a 12 to 18 to 24-month view, then I think some of the leading names in this sector, I think one should start accumulating them. One should because you saw HDFC Bank results, and I think although they have admitted that there are tough times insofar as the current quarter is concerned, but enough contingency reserves have been built by them, I think, to tide over the crisis. The growth levels obviously will come off, uh, 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 but at the same time, I think the market has sort of uh, punished them. I think in terms of the derating, in terms of the valuations for these companies. So I think I would be underweight on the banking sector, but at the same time, I would not be grossly underweight. I'll be sort of a shade below the equal weight kind of a stance that I will take on the banking sector. On the NBFCs, on the other hand, I think clearly I would be more worried there, because it will be a sector where I think as we go ahead, only the those NBFCs which have the ability to raise resources at attractive rates will be able to gain over their counterparts, which are sort of the smaller and medium-sized NBFCs, or those NBFCs that have created a niche in terms of the category that they cater to. So from that perspective, I think one will need to be very watchful, because some of the large sources of funding for the NBFCs, like the fixed income mutual fund industry, or sort of the banking sector itself, I think has become a worry, and it needs to. And in fact, we have seen the banks being nudged by the RBI, I think, to sort of to provide support to the NBFCs. So I think NBFCs, I'll only be looking at some of the stronger ones, which have been there for years and have a strong position, be it in the mortgage lending, or sort of in case of consumer lending also. Uh, the other sector sort of that everyone is positive on is the healthcare sector, because one has seen roughly 48% rise in the NSE Pharma Index just in last 1 year. Although if you look at on a YOY basis, I think many of the stocks are just about flat or just about have gone up just on a YOY basis. So which means in the last 12 months they had come off quite sharply. And in fact, in last 2 months back, I think it was a sector which was a pariah sector. No one was willing to look at it. But the fact that there's under ownership in that sector, and it was looked at as a sector which where people thought that they'll find a safe haven, has led to people getting headlong into that sector, and also sort of a belief that the kind of anger that has been that the Chinese government has been at the receiving end of the Western world would make the West, I think, look at diversifying the supply chain networks, especially in crucial sectors like pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, chemicals, and specialty chemicals. It's more so in pharmaceuticals and biotechnology, and that sort of had led to the sharp up move that one saw in some of the pharma names. Now here, I think one will have to look at how the results pan out. And one also saw a flurry of approvals being given by US FDA, making people believe that the Americans are not as negatively disposed today at the Indian pharma sector as they were a couple of years back, when a lot of plants had come under a cloud, and the resolution of them used to take not less than 24 to 36 months. I think the sector sort of uh, in my opinion, in the medium term, I think one needs to have an exposure out there, but one must be buying it only on dips, because one has seen a very sharp rise, and one needs to wait for the results, and then sort of any opportunity one gets, one should start looking at sort of deploying some money in the pharmaceuticals and healthcare sector. I think the other sector within healthcare is diagnostics. I could say hospitals, and if I could, I think even the insurance sector, I think is a sector which is linked to the healthcare. Now, insurance, one can say, if you take life insurance companies in particular, I believe that some of the leading private sector life insurance companies ought to be part of a core portfolio, because that's one sector which is going to gain market share over time, like it has happened in case of the AMC business, in case of airlines business, in case of telecom business, in case of power distribution business. An efficient and nimble-footed private players have gained at the cost of public sector monopolies uh, or public sector players. So I think that's why some of the leading names there, like HDFC Life or SBI Life, ought to be looked at with the medium-term perspective. I think on the IT, now this is a classic sector where it used to be a traditional safe haven. But today, what has happened is that the rupee's weakness is acting as a tailwind there. But majority of the revenues come from the developed world, America 60-65%, 20-25% from the EU and UK. And with the company after company withdrawing guidance, and many industries sort of facing existential threat in the COVID, till such time that the COVID issue gets resolved, I think it is likely that many of these companies will do away with their discretionary IT spends. But what they will essentially not do away, and they can't do away, is what is called run the business. So if you want, if someone is doing your infrastructure management remotely, I think that continues, that will have to be continued. Or say certain application maintenance and development work that needs to be continued. Some digital services, sort of, will need to continue. Cloud, sorry, you want to move to cloud. I think that process is on. You'll need to continue with that. In fact, in the commentary that both TCS, Infosys, and Wipro gave, I think they did hint that some of these new age services about digitization, cloud computing is something where they are seeing sort of continued interest. Although they did admit that there are many clients that are looking at vendor consolidation, and pricing pressure also could follow suit. Also, let's not forget that we are moving into an US election year. Trump is due for election in November, and the rhetoric, I think, that usually starts, I think, in the run up to the elections is quite toxic and quite caustic for the Indian IT players. And I think Trump has moved quite aggressively in terms of cutting down on the immigration, as today morning he has done. So I think IT, but at the same time, they have strong balance sheets. They are they generate cash hand over fist, extremely tight working capital management, uh, and sort of a conversion to cash is very high, high margin businesses. So from that perspective, I believe that one needs sort of to be constructive on IT. I think one cannot be grossly underweight on IT. Then I think, if you look at consumer discretionary items, items like say consumer durables or automobiles, I think automobiles had seen in the wake of the ILFS crisis, most of the NBFCs used to fund the ecosystem of auto companies, and they had taken a hit. So the base has been quite favorable. And then again, one saw as we moved into the BS6, I think many companies had pulled back on their inventory management and tightened their working capital sort of cycle. So I think they have a favorable base going for them. And here I think some of the rural focused two wheelers or passenger vehicles, basically vehicle players or tractor players, I think one can sort of start looking at them from a medium term perspective. Uh, uh, Similarly, I think for the consumer durables also. Now, insofar as consumer staples are concerned, or FMCG companies are concerned, FMCG and retail, I think the belief is that these companies will not be negatively impacted. But let's not forget that many of these companies are operating at with skeletal staff, with low utilization levels, and they're only selling essential items. So, for instance, all the personal products, I think, sort of non-essential items cannot be sold, and only essential items can be sold. Plus, the valuations, I think, they're stratospherically high. Although the return ratios are strong, but the underlying earnings growth, although better than many other sectors, it still sort of dwarfs as compared to the discounting that they have. What I mean is the valuations are very high. If something is trading at 60 times 1 year forward, and the underlying earnings growth is only 20%, although there is a secular steady growth, but somewhere I think the valuations will come into picture. But right now, because there's a fear psychosis in the market, people are unwilling to let go of their positions in the consumer staples business. Same is the case also with retail business. I think we saw one of the leading retail companies mentioning through a press release that only 50% of their stores are uh, running, and of the 50% stores that are running, uh, they can only sell the food items, grocery items, which are typically low margin items, and the apparels and other non-essential items, the government has not allowed them to sell them. But yet, I think one is seeing the stock prices defying gravity. So I think this is again a classic case of people being worried and sort of unwilling to sort of let go of what they perceive to be safe havens. Uh, Capital goods, but again, I think out here there are companies in the foods business, I think, which are not so expensive, and which also have come off in the current fall, which one can one can look at them from the portfolio construct perspective. I think industrials and capital goods and infrastructure is one sector where I believe the first impulse of the government will be to provide a stimulus for the consumption side, and then I think the government could think of infrastructure and sort of a pump priming of the economy. So I think here again sort of the recovery could get delayed, and large commitments, capital commitments from the government for infrastructure projects, I think look difficult when fiscally they are quite constrained. And plus the private sector sort of the animal spirits are as good as dead. So I think one will have to have a long haul for a long winter insofar as capital goods and industrials are concerned. One needs to be careful there. Global cyclicals like metals, I think again there is a sharp pressure on sort of prices because of demand cratering, and sort of so there again, unless there is stability in the global markets, one needs to keep away from metal companies. Insofar as domestic cyclicals are concerned, like cement, I think again as the construction activity picks up steam, the demand could come back. But here the good thing is that the industry has got consolidated in many pockets, and hence there's a price discipline that the industry has demonstrated. And therefore, even if the volume growth is not so encouraging, but the pricing discipline will ensure, and the cost cutting measures that they have put in place will ensure that the EBITDA per ton remains quite strong. That's why cement, one needs to be constructive and look at some of the good companies in the cement sector, especially those companies, uh, uh, which have strong balance sheets. Uh, Lastly, I think if you look at the oil and gas sector, then I think you one realizes that the uh, uh, the refinery margins, I think, will be under pressure. Marketing margins will look up for the refiners. There will be large inventory losses that one will have to bear for the companies in the immediate the results to be announced for the last quarter. But the valuations have come off quite significantly. And with privatization happening from the large marketing player, I think one can be constructive there. Also, I think the big daddy of them all, I think the large deal announced yesterday and the multiple sort of triggers in terms of monetization of their tower assets, fiber assets, as well as the oil and petrochemical business, I think are the three sort of sort of triggers that the market will be looking forward over the next 12 months. And the fact that the company has made a definitive statement that they would like to be net zero, sort of uh, uh, net cash positive, net cash positive, sort of essentially is something that is making a lot of investors look at them with a positive light. Also, the telecom sector is something that will emerge as a winner in this in this turmoil, because from the 15-16 player market around say 8-10 years back, clearly one has seen a consolidation with two extremely strong players, and the third one in the private sector being a weak player. Uh, and hence the top two guys, I think, will cohabit, and a semblance of sanity in terms of the tariffs would prevail, in my opinion. In fact, one could look at increase in the tariffs over the next 12 to 6 to 12 months. And with the consumption of data, the trend towards work from home sort of strengthening from here on, I think one should be constructive on these two now, on both the players in telecom sector. So telecom sector, one should be clearly overweight, in my opinion. So that sort of sums up sort of my view about the markets, about economy, markets, sectors, and valuations. So I think now we'll throw the floor open for a few questions. Uh, uh, I think moderator, I think we can
Yeah.
start taking questions.
Yeah, Ajay, I'll take it. So, friends, you have a Q&A window. Thanks, Ajay, for your time, and it was a really informative session. So now we have a Q&A window down. I'll be reading out the question. Ajay, you also can click on the Q&A window. We'll be able to see the questions. As I was seeing, there are certain few technical questions and few questions which are stock specific. We will refrain from taking a technical question, and we'll try as far as possible, if we can, if we have that stock under coverage, or if we can reply to, because it's really difficult to take a questions on stocks or specific stocks, or at the same time it is very difficult to take the questions which are based on the technicals, right? So probably we have one question which is very interesting, that what's your take on the interest rate given the government are likely to increase and its impact on the banks and the finance companies like Bajaj Finance, Shriram Transport. Definitely Ajay has addressed this, but Ajay, in a brief, if you could just sum up in 2-3 minutes about these questions.
Yeah. See, I think insofar as interest rates are concerned, as I mentioned, uh, the RBI's stance of monetary accommodation will continue over a long period. One is seeing sort of all the global central banks in a mood to sort of increase their balance sheet size. So the open-ended sort of monetary stimulus that the Fed has announced, I think it's possible that the other central banks like ECB and Bank of Japan also sort of could do that. And as I mentioned, as long as the oil prices continue to remain benign and the threat of imported inflation, I think recedes with a strong current account position that we would be in. And in my opinion, I think even capital flows, which were essentially responsible, the outflows for the plunge in the Indian equities, I think as the risk aversion has receded, because if you look at the VIX both in India and US, I think that's a clear indicator. Plus the so I feel that the capital flows also, I think once the economy opens up, I think should start coming back to India. So RBI can continue to breathe easy, and the interest rates, in my opinion, will continue to remain benign. Insofar as the NBFC stocks are concerned, although I'll not specifically address any company, but I believe that companies which have very strong franchise and which have the ability to utilize artificial intelligence and data mining to sort of ensure that their NPA levels remain in check, and which have demonstrated that over the last many years, I think are the ones that will be able to navigate these tough times. And some of these companies that you mentioned, one of the companies that you mentioned, did address this issue head on, and they did lay out a clear roadmap about how they intend to cut costs. And every cost head they addressed, be it advertising and marketing expenses, or any further R&D investments in technology, for instance. So they did address that in case the lockdown were to continue till a particular period, what kind of cost savings they will need to tighten more and more. So I think some of these companies today, I think do appear to be completely out of favor, and there will be no dearth of negatives that analysts will be able to cite for these companies. But we have seen that the bottoms are formed when there is a sense of despondency and when everyone throws in the towel. But what really needs to be seen is the quality of management, the the strength of the business, and how they're able to manage their costs. And I think these businesses do come back. So that's why people say that a good business in bad times is the right time to buy that business. So the business is good, possibly times are bad. The times bad will not remain forever. And then when the times do turn, the tide does turn, the same business gets re-rated, and then everyone wants to buy that. So the only thing is one needs to be patient if one buys these businesses, and one needs to refrain from looking at the price on a daily basis for such businesses. But these are the good entry points for these businesses, in my opinion.
We have one more question, which is very interesting, I think. So I thought, let me take it out of the line, and that's answer that entire world will be looking. But honestly, neither Ajay nor will we have that answer, saying that what is the lowest level where Nifty can reach. The day we will know the lowest level for Nifty, friends, we'll ensure that the entire portfolio is constructed on that very day. See, as Ajay has explained, you need to construct the portfolio. When we say the construct the portfolio, one needs to look at the investment in a proper manner, allow professionals to manage your wealth, and buy in a falling market some percentage sector-wise, stock-wise, and allocate your money. So as we have always been saying that when you have the professionals available and you can utilize the services of the professionals, it in this kind of turbulent market, it is really, really difficult to have or look at self-medication in terms of buying. So probably the lower level of Nifty is not something that one should look at it. Start building up the portfolio, rely more on professionals. We are always there. If you have your current equity investments, you can always email us at plpms@plindia.com. We will study those investments. We'll come back with you in the proper answers and the proper fashions. Ajay, would you like to take this China question that is will suffer this export one?
One second. Can you just read the question, Nupur, for me?
China will suffer the loss in the export of metals as the majority countries are winding their businesses and the relationship with the China that can. So it's more about the opportunities of India. That is a good opportunity for India to overcome, which could yet convert the Indian metal market and can boost the metal market. So maybe China, which is a metal.
I think, I would personally, I would feel that if one has to bet on the supply chain disruption impacting the Chinese sort of economy, or rather, let me put it this way. I think if the MNCs in the West decide to diversify their supply chains, the industries that they would first sort of start with, in my opinion, will be critical sectors for them, namely pharmaceuticals, which will be right there at the top, especially injectables. In fact, there have been statements that the injectables, they would like to be within American borders itself. So that again is a separate debate. So what kind of impact will that have on Indian vendors or Indian companies that have a large presence in supplying injectables out of India into US? But that's a separate debate. But I think there's one sector, pharmaceuticals, and within that injectables, that they would like to be closer to them. Then sort of so pharma, and then sort of biotech and chemicals is one sector where I think they would like to first diversify the supply chains. But then it is not very easy. I think it's very fanciful for us to believe that whatever is China's loss could be India's gain. But then we are in a competitive world, and although we have dropped the taxation rates and made it quite competitive in the South Asian context for newer manufacturing facilities, why do we not we should always be mindful that other factor costs like labor costs, land costs, electricity costs, I think when you compare them vis-a-vis our neighborhood like Thailand or Vietnam or Bangladesh, for that instance, I think you will find that the flexibility that the companies have in case of labor sort of hiring and firing, so sort of plus the other costs like electricity, ease of doing business. I think some of these countries are way ahead of India, and the major bureaucracy in India always acts as a deterrent for many labor-intensive industries to come to India. So from that perspective, I think it will not be all cakewalk for India. India will have to fight hard with the competing destinations to attract industries. But of course, the labor cost also going up in China. I think it will make sense for many of the MNCs from the West to look at diversifying their sources. Insofar as the metals are concerned, there is simply no comparison. Like if you look at steel, I think out of say 2 billion tons, for instance, if China is 1.2 billion tons, we are 100 million tons. So I think we are very puny, like the other countries, insofar as say steel is concerned. So I think there the economy of scale will never, at least in the next many years, be favoring India. So from that perspective, I think but at the same time, those Indian companies that are fully integrated backward, and where prices have come off, stock prices have come off, do offer an opportunity, but one needs to look at the total leverage that they have run into, because some of these companies have already acquired, some of them are in the process of acquiring large sort of steel mills which had sort of gone into the through the NCLT route. So one will need to balance the two. I think in a current environment where demand will continue to remain tepid, I think the impact of the balance sheet get sort of having large debt vis-a-vis sort of the evolving dynamics insofar as profits in the current context are concerned.
Okay, we have one more question, which is also very interesting, that there is a possibility of some of the companies will be bankrupt due to the COVID lockdown. See, understand that COVID, this is the first of its kind of situation that every one of us, including corporates, are facing, where every one of us are locked down and we are working from home. So when you have the circumstances, or when you have the challenges which are never seen before, nobody knows. See, no one know. Today it's not about India, it's not about China, it's not about US, it's the entire world blocking their borders. Nobody wants people to travel, or probably the businesses have come to standstill. So obviously the certain businesses which cannot cope up with the challenges, the businesses which have a capital constraint, the businesses which, suppose if this lockdown extends in India, then certain manufacturing units cannot open, so they would definitely feel the pinch of that. So there, this time are going to be turbulent. This turbulent time are going to have lot of problems in companies, and companies may look at going, I would not say the bankrupt, but would definitely have a cash crunch, and they will find it very, very difficult. And that's the reason where you need to have the portfolio construct, which is very, very, you need to be very careful, as Ajay has rightly said, telecom and certain businesses, which can have a continuity in the businesses irrespective of the lockdown. So the challenges is completely different in front of us, friends. Please understand, this is the first ever time. Nobody knows in the world, and nobody had an answer that what if you were to be locked down for 1.5 months, 2 months, 3 months, and when no people, we have seen that in crude. What happened? Probably all of a sudden the demand for the crude came down and the storages went, but there was no storage available, and we have seen the price of the crude falling. So these are unprecedented times. This is the first time, and we are also learning. We, when I say we, world is also learning to deal with these situations, which is completely new for everyone. Then we have, what should we recommend for? Okay, there's one question, Ajay, which is related to the commodities, which is gold, which is very good if we can answer that. What do you recommend for investing into the gold funds at this time also?
Okay. See, now I think it might seem quite coincidental or spooky, but sometime in December, I had written a small piece, and it's there on the on our PL website, where I had said that the uh, the competition among the global central banks in terms of printing money, I think, to shore up the economy, a, by lowering rates and by getting into quantitative easing, that is buying bonds, uh, clearly would lead to a debasement of these currencies. So today, I think, and hence I had said that the final outcome of this is that finite resources like gold and silver, but in particular gold, because silver also has industrial demand, whereas gold sort of is a pure store of wealth, and it acts as a hedge against inflation. So at some point in time in future, I think this massive uh, printing of currency is going to lead to trust deficit and also hyperinflation. And hence, I think if there's one resource, I think where people will continue to have and repose faith, that will be gold. And hence, I think one needs to at that point I had said. Plus, remember that the global central banks, in their total sort of portfolio, I think gold sort of was not so gold was highly underweight. And even I'd said that even at some point in time, some of these global central banks, sort of because of, let's take China for instance, which is it's a frenemy, as they say, of America. A friend at the same time an enemy. So for them, I think to continue to pile on to US treasuries, along with say euros and Swiss francs and Japanese assets, Japanese government assets. They would also like to have certain allocations to metals like say gold and silver and other precious metals. So I think there are multiple tailwinds for gold prices. One, as I said, is debasement of currencies due to this hyper competition among central banks to print money to ensure that the economies don't crater. Second, I think, as I said, the geopolitical reasons which I just mentioned. And third is the fact that global central banks and many portfolios were grossly underweight in gold. So I think we have seen that any asset class or any sector within an asset class where there is massive under ownership, that alone becomes the trigger for the next bull run. When people realize that, I think they have overdone the erosion in stock prices or in prices of commodities, and a small incremental demand can then lead to disproportionate impact on the price of that sector. When I say sector, the stocks in the sector or of that commodity, and that is what is that is what is happening in gold and will continue to happen in gold, in my opinion, for some time. So one needs to have some allocation to gold.
Okay, we have one more question which is partly answered, and probably I'll take it. That what is your opinion on medical insurance companies going forward? See, as we have already discussed, and Ajay also said that probably the healthcare pharma is favor, and for sure, because of the kind of environment that we are, people spending, the spending of every individual which was there for the medical and the healthcare of the family would definitely go up. People will surely look at some allocations at the regular medical, probably checkups or other, or maybe increasing their medical requirement when it comes to the insurance companies, or taking a higher mediclaims, and also ensuring that they have. So in a lifestyle of an individual, when we say that house, education, travel, which are the priorities, medical for sure will also fall into that one of the priorities, considering the current time. And we believe that that will become the part of the lifestyle for most of the people, and that is likely to remain for long, because this is a completely different time, and that and with this time people will now realize to definitely allocate some parts. So definitely one should look at the probably either medical or an insurance stocks for sure with the medium to long term, and it's a good part to build, be a part of the portfolio for this companies to be there. There is, how do you find the, okay, so gold we have already answered. One should look at investing more into an active funds, because the bottoms up approach is very much required. There are a lot of franchises, as Ajay has already explained, and a lot of stocks which are having excellent intrinsic value in terms of the risk reward ratios, and they can definitely provide a very good returns in the years to come. So our question would be that this is at this time, had it been an earlier time, definitely it would have been an index fund. But right now, one can definitely look at the active funds, which takes bottoms up approach, which would which will have a stock or the sector agnostic, and which will build the portfolio considering the intrinsic value of each franchisees. Okay, so hospitality, entertainment, we have already. Ajay, there's one question on the sectors of the hospitality, entertainment. I believe we have covered, right? Or not? Then you can just.
Yeah, I think these are the
Okay.
sectors that have got savagely impacted, along with aviation. Sectors like say hospitality, it is hotels, and aviation also are the ones which have very high fixed costs. They're capital intensive sectors, and hence the occupancies, I think, matter the most there, because I think every sort of seat lost or every hotel room lost, I think is a loss forever. And so I think they are going to face tough times. And what is also worrisome is that even after the lockdown opens up in a staggered manner, the propensity among consumers to sort of again go back to their old way of life. Uh, uh, so in my opinion, the travel sort of unless it is absolutely necessary, people would scale down on travel. Only business travel sort of people would sort of to start with at least prefer uh, at least till such time that a curative treatment is found. And secondly, I think in case of hospitality and aviation companies, I think one will have to look at their balance sheets all the more carefully. We've seen, like in the American context in particular, I think the airlines are burning cash, and so is the case in India. I think at a very rapid clip, and are looking at a bailout from the respective governments. So I think one will have to uh, tread carefully in these sectors. Uh, the in case of airlines, I think at least one can say that there is sort of a two or three player market predominantly. So I think to that extent, I think it is not a very fragmented kind of a market, a concentrated kind of a market. Uh, but I think one still will need to wait and see the results and the commentary from these managements for the current quarter, and then sort of one can take a view whether one would like to allocate some capital there.
Okay. Friends, see, as we had said, Ajay and I, we at Prabhudas Lilladher Portfolio Management Services, we construct the portfolio looking at the bottoms up approach. We definitely divide the investments into the various sectors and the stocks. Ajay and I, we both are always open for personal discussion in case if anyone has. You can always call us up or connect with us. My email ID is nupurpatel@plindia.com. I'll repeat once again. It's nupurpatel@plindia.com. It's NUPURPATEL@plindia.com. You can write me. You can definitely send your portfolio also if you want us to review your portfolio and give the advice on your portfolio. We will humbly request everyone that we are open for accepting the funds right now. We personally believe that these are the times when one needs to definitely start building up the portfolio, because the markets, it's not about the markets giving an opportunity and all. It's always the difficult time, and the turbulent time is one when you invest, you definitely make good returns out of it over the period of time. For sure, anyone who will be investing now will have to at least give patiently 2 to 3 years for the portfolio to give him a decent return. And there would be definitely a turbulent and the volatility in between. But when you do the investment in stagger manner with the right approach and selecting the right kind of companies and stocks, definitely over the period of time, the one remains the winners and can definitely invest with this. So, Ajay, if you have anything on the portfolio construct as a closing remark, and then we can close this.
Yeah, I think as we've said that uh, one needs to start looking at investments in a staggered manner. As we've emphasized time and again, no one can invest in a fallen market, but in a falling market. And one sort of these are the opportunities when you look back in hindsight. I think where the leading companies in many sectors have corrected significantly, and if you take a 3 to 5 year perspective, I think these become very good entry points. uh, I would urge you sort of to reach out to us. We can have a one-on-one discussions about your current portfolios, and sort of take it forward from here. Uh, as Nupur has said, if you have any further queries, you can also write to us. And I think one needs to be greedy when there is an atmosphere of fear, and this is what all the pundits of investing have said. And right now, there is a sense of trepidation, sense of fear, sense of uncertainty. Uh, we don't know how the situation would evolve a week from now, a month from now. But then we do know that we have weathered many such storms as sort of in the investing world over the last many decades. in India, overseas. So it is sort of a time when one needs sort of to look at those companies which have withstood the vicissitudes of such turbulence in the past and have come out on tops because of the strength of their business model, because how they have mitigated risks insofar as the sourcing of business is concerned, raising of funds is concerned, various geographical markets that they cater are concerned, and have a portfolio of such companies, 15 to 18 to 20 companies, which one can keep with a 3 to 5 year perspective. With that sort of, I would like
There's
to.
just one, Ajay, 1 second. There was one question related to the costing and charges. So see, we have a different kind of fee structure models. So we have a fee structure model which are based purely on the fixed management fee. We do have a fee structure model which are based on the fixed plus variable, which is with related to the certain threshold of the returns, and over and above there are hurdle rates, and then there's a profit sharing. Anyone who needs to know more about our commercials can definitely send an email or get in touch with me, as I've already shared my email ID. Once again, for the benefit of all participants, I'll spell out my email ID. It's NUPUR PATEL Patel at PLindia.com. Once you'll write it to us, or you can always get in touch with your respective relationship managers at Prabhudas Lilladher. They would also help us to connect with us, Ajay or me. And in case if you have any queries and the questions specific related to the sector stocks, which I have not taken up in the open forum, I could see there were a lot of questions related to specific companies, specific stocks. I would urge everyone to get in touch with us one-on-one, either Ajay or me, and we will definitely try to reply to your questions. Should we conclude, Ajay? Is that okay?
Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone, for your patient hearing, and we really appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you, everyone, and we are looking forward to serving you as your portfolio managers. Please do feel free to get in touch with us, and we'll be always you are welcome at Prabhudas Lilladher. Thank you, everyone.